you know what, the last 20 years, if you know enough economics, you're going to make some money. Okay, if you could guess the next non-farm payroll number within, I don't know, 50,000, you're going to be a rich man. But in the last few years, it is very clear. If you don't understand politics, I don't care how much economics you know, you are destined to lose money. What's happened in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine, it's just a dress rehearsal of the bigger, basically, Cold War that's going to be unfolding between U.S. and China. And there's no doubt in my mind that this administration in Washington, have proved to be very reckless. I mean, to the extent that it just keeps pushing and pushing and pushing, as though that basically provocation has no consequences. And I think we're talking about money here and investing. At the end of the day, this channel promotes investing. I think what the viewers need to understand is something very simple, which is, I've been doing this for a very long time, okay? I started my career at the International Monetary Fund in the 90s. I worked in London and New York for the last 20 years. My last job, I ran the #1 ranked research team on Wall Street for macro strategy. I can tell you, I've never seen, a year like this year. And what do I mean by that? In the past, when things go wrong, you can always expect, politicians or policymakers to ultimately come to reason and throw the market a lifeline because, certainly through my entire career, economics was the most important objective for politicians in practically every country, at least in democratic, basically, countries. Okay. This is the first time I've seen that politicians don't give a damn about economics, that they, in their pursuit of their political objective or their geopolitical objective, And that started with the war on Russia. There's no doubt that Biden, by declaring total war against Russia, has done more damage to the U.S. and the West than it's done to basically Russia. And I've argued that frequently in my videos on my YouTube channel if you want to watch. And then, so there is no doubt, the fact that they're even still at it is shocking. So from that point of view, that is the one thing I learned in 2022 as a strategist. So I don't want to make that same mistake again in terms of not believing that, the U.S. will risk war with Russia by doing what it did. So from that point of view, when I see what's happening in Taiwan, all I see is a government that's capable of basically putting its political priority in front of its economic priority, even as the economy basically approaches the next recession. And I think that, for me, is the biggest takeaway here.
Given that, David, when you watch the developments in Taiwan, first of all, would you expect an escalation of the current situation? And secondly, who will escalate the situation, China or the U.S.?
Yeah, I think right now, this is the way you got to look at this, right? First of all, listen, I grew up in Taiwan. I was born in the U.S., I lived most of my life in the U.S., but I grew up in Taiwan, My family still lives in Taiwan. I can tell you this is something very painful for me to see actually what's going on because, you know what? I'm an American, but I have my family, my roots in Taiwan. There is no question that, Taiwan is going to be the biggest loser, in this conflict, to the extent that Ukraine has become the biggest loser in that conflict. Because all that's happening is the U.S. is keeping basically pumping more money and weapons, into Ukraine so that the U.S. can fight to the last Ukrainian, You know what? It's pretty amazing that now that they're leaning on Zelensky possibly to strike up some kind of compromise with Putin, if a compromise with Putin is letting basically Putin keep Donbass and whatever, and for, Ukraine to declare they will never join NATO, guess what? Zelensky could have gotten that 5 months ago without seeing 20% of his country completely destroyed, thousands are killed, and basically millions basically displaced. So I think the first thing we have to understand is this, that if you look at what happened to Ukraine, is the complete disregard for what happens to the Ukraine, from the point of view of U.S. and Europe. That is the most sad part of the story, which is that, the Ukraine, we can fight to the last Ukrainian. Who cares? Because as long as the war is basically being fought in Ukraine. At the end of the day, that's the story. Now, so from that point of view, this is a very different thing, saying, oh, well, I'm going to send my soldier into the field or that I'm going to be fighting on my own home turf. That is not what's happening in Ukraine. And that's not going to happen in Taiwan either. So from that point of view, countries are much more ready. You know what to say, well, democracy, freedom. Do you know, actually, it's very funny. A recent survey out of Taiwan shows that only 30% of Taiwanese support independence. Okay. And only 5% of these 30% of people support independence immediately. Taiwan already enjoy de facto independence. Taiwan has democracy, right? I mean, this is like Taiwan has its own elected government. It doesn't make any decisions because what China says it wants. Taiwan has an elected government, enjoys vibrant democracy, and most people think that, they're happy with the status quo. So what is Nancy Pelosi doing in Taiwan? Except to provoke the Chinese. I mean, that's, and I told you before, I think, the calculation, again, I'm going to, what? The problem is that nobody really, this is not like economics, right? I've always said, the last 20 years, if you know enough economics, you're going to make some money, okay? If you could guess the next non-farm payroll number within, 50,000, you're going to be a rich man. But in the last few years, it is very clear. If you don't understand politics, I don't care how much economics you know, you are destined to lose money, okay? Now, there is no doubt. If I look at the tea leaves on the table, I see a lot of coincidence, right? I just told you, like, it's amazing. Like Pelosi visits Taiwan in the same week that the Senate, Foreign Relations Committee is going to pass a new Taiwan Policy Act that is going to piss the shit out of the Chinese. That will be seen as a total provocation of Chinese. Now, so why, if you imagine that this is, I'm not saying this is not a conspiracy theory. Imagine this is not a coincidence. How can we explain it? I'll tell you, it's very simple. Pelosi knows that China will have to react to her visit to Taiwan. She also knows that if China were to react strongly, it will make it much easier for her to push through the Taiwan Policy Act through Congress. Okay. Listen, I don't share Pelosi's politics, but I do not underestimate her when it comes to knowing how to basically, create the political conditions to get a bill passed. On that, she is a master of the craft. That's why she survived so long as the speaker. My point here is that is the ultimate aim here. I think the Americans have decided they want to pick a fight with China. Okay? That China's gotten too big for his pants. Okay? The U.S. will need an excuse. Okay? Now, U.S., just like U.S. wanted to go after Russia, and they found Ukraine as an excuse, because Ukraine has been a political football between U.S. and Russia for the last 12 years, since 2012, by the way, when basically Putin accused, Hillary Clinton, for trying to interfere with the elections in Ukraine, not to mention Russia for that matter, okay? My point here is that, every country the U.S. need an excuse to go after Russia in a big way, and Ukraine provided that excuse perfectly, and now is trying to find an excuse in Taiwan to go after China. Now, I do think, and what's also interesting is this, there are other signs that the U.S. is gearing up, okay, to basically go to war with China possibly. I'll tell you why. And this is another coincidence. You tell me if this is another coincidence. Just last week, the U.S. Congress passed a $280 billion chips and science bill, okay, that was signed into law by the president, right? That literally is going to be writing checks to companies like Intel to basically create chips manufacturing, basically capabilities on U.S. soil. Okay. Now, it's actually funny if you think about this, right? Because we know that, the crown jewel of the Taiwanese economy basically is semiconductor industry, right? I mean, Taiwan accounts for 90% of the market share of the high-tech chips produced in the world that go into phones, cars, you name it. Okay. Now, I can tell you, okay, talking to Pentagon people in the past, there was definitely a lot of wariness in Washington about a conflict between China and Taiwan that could create a sudden shortage of these chips that will deprive Americans of their new phones, new TVs, and new cars. In my view, this $280 billion bill, to a great extent, is designed, ironically, to reduce U.S. dependence on Taiwanese-produced chips, so as to allow the U.S. a freer hand to pursue a much more confrontational policy vis-a-vis China. Okay. So you tell me what the Taiwanese are going to get out of this, right? Because in the best scenario for the Taiwanese, okay, they're going to lose out the crown jewel of their economy to the U.S., the chip industry. In the worst scenario, the U.S. is going to provoke a war with China that will be fought mainly in Taiwan, that will be devastating for Taiwanese and for the Taiwanese economy. So again, we have to realize what is really going on here. So in the past, if this was going on, if this happened 3 years ago under Trump, Nancy Pelosi, let's say she had been, speaker, if she got up to basically like Taiwan for like, whatever, I would say, if the market had basically sold off on that, I would say buy. Okay? Because Trump understood what was in the U.S. best interest. Okay? Because Trump doesn't have a bee in his bonnet when it comes to promoting democracy, because Trump was not a hypocrite. Okay? But with this administration, right now, I'm much more inclined to sell than to buy. Okay? Because I think we're looking at potentially a slippery slope here, because there's no doubt China will have to react.
If we look at the perception of these events, first of all in China, but secondly in Taiwan as well, what is the reaction that you expect from the Chinese authorities to this line of event?
Listen, the Chinese are very simple. I mean, I think at this point it's very simple. At the end of the day, this is going to be the focus. Who cares about Pelosi's trip? Okay. The much more important thing is going to be the Taiwan Policy Act, which I told you is now basically in Congress. Okay. It's going to be voted on today, in fact. Okay. In the Foreign Relations Act. China will be very wary that this act, if passed, essentially will be a path towards Taiwanese independence. That it will be a path for the U.S. to eventually recognize Taiwanese independence. So China, from that point of view, cannot afford to sit and do nothing, okay, given what is going on. However, the Chinese are also pretty smart, right? I mean, because at the end of the day, think about this, right? I mean, it's actually funny because, the market was celebrating today that the Chinese did not go in there and shoot down basically, Pelosi's plane, okay? Or didn't send out fighter jets to basically, intercept our planes, right? So you say, well, maybe the Chinese were bluffing after all. But let's think about this. Let's just imagine, one of the great tools, that I always fall back on when I think about this type of situation is game theory. Right? If we think in game theory, the terms in game theory, which is about the analysis of strategic interaction between multiple players. Okay, what basically game theory will tell me right now is that China understands, that if it were to invade Taiwan tomorrow, it would basically, literally start World War III. Okay. You start something like that when you absolutely have no choice. I don't think we're quite there at that moment. But there is no question China will have to do something, because they realize if they don't do anything, you know what? Things are going to get worse, and then they're going to lose the advantage of being able to act first. So what are they waiting for? Okay. If you're Xi Jinping, for example. I think they're just waiting for one thing. They want to see how the Russia-Ukraine war plays out.
Hey there, revolutionaries. To join a community sharing insights like you just watched, head over to realvision.com. There you will get unbiased insights and exclusive access to the very best, brightest, and biggest names in finance. Be a part of our community of lifelong learners. See you there.